Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the SIDS Virtual Forum. And for this morning, SIDS is being joined by Cardi to present this virtual forum on promoting of food security in Caribbean SIDS, Caribbean SIDS, Small Island Developing States, Sustainable Development Initiatives. Now, for those who are not clear on all these acronyms, SIDS is the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, very well-known part of the University of the West Indies here in St. Augustine, Mona, and in Cave Hill. And Cardi is the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute. And this morning we're talking about food security, which of course is a very hot topic these days. In fact, it should have been a hot topic for a very long time, but now the crunch is here. So it's become an even hotter topic. We have welcoming remarks coming on from three persons, from SIDS, from Cardi, and from CARICOM. So I won't say too much at this stage because the persons who are going to do the welcoming remarks are going to set the scene. So if I could first ask the acting director of the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, that's Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, to present the his opening remarks from SIDS. And by the way, before I go on, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, SIDS, and I'm sure that Godfrey will correct me if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. So Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to once again sit and witness the beginning of yet another SIDS virtual forum. SIDS has convened 12 of these forums thus far. We had our first one in October of 2021, and these forums have been held on a monthly basis, targeting specifically issues akin to development, setting development agendas and charting development policies, whether in Trinidad and Tobago, the wider Caribbean, the global South, and even internationally. SIDS prides itself as a development think tank that charts development training in development studies and research in development studies also. And we have been engaged in such an endeavor since 1999. Today is a very special day insofar as SIDS has extended its tentacles and is now collaborating with CARDI, the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute that is located on the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies. And we feel we are very energized by the fact that this synergy between these two organizations has taken place. SIDS, as I mentioned, is about promoting development studies, fostering development trajectories, and facilitating development policy. And we feel strongly that from time to time, we need to collaborate with partners who share that kind of vision, especially in specific subject matter areas. So today, we have decided that we will look at the issue of food security, and there was no better partner to collaborate with than the Caribbean Agricultural Research Development Institute, CARDI. So we established meetings, we met with a team from CARDI, and here we are today with a distinguished panel that is going to set the tone and create a very interesting discourse on the topic that you will all enjoy. We have had very exciting forums thus far, and I do not think this one is going to be any different given the wide array of perspectives that are going to be brought to bear upon the issue of food security in Caribbean SIDS. So having said that, I just want to thank everyone for gracing us with their presence. And before I leave, I just want to make a few quick announcements with respect to some upcoming events that SIDS is going to be championing The first is a spotlight lecture that is going to be held next Friday at 10 a.m. and it's entitled Financing a Low Carbon Economy, Financing a Low Carbon Economy, a Case for a Trinidad and Tobago Green Investment Bank. And this lecture will be delivered by a fellow who is stationed at SIDS currently, and he is Dr. Robert Stewart. So you can place that in your calendar for next Friday, Financing a Low Carbon Economy, a Case for Trinidad and Tobago Green Investment Bank. The second event is going to be our 14th virtual SIDS Forum, and it's entitled Development Finance for a Low Carbon Caribbean Future, Issues and Solutions. And this again will be led by Dr. Robert Stewart, but at the same time, we are hoping and we are expecting to have 6 panelists: Dr. Emily Braley, who is based in Kenya, Dr. Kirk Douglas, who is based in Barbados, Dr. Don Charles from Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Priya Mohan and Dr. Robert Stewart, both fellows from SIDS St. Augustine, and Dr. Kellan Bubb, who is based in the United States. So again, you can see that our intention is to really bring a host of international experts who can speak to the issues. And that SIDS Forum will be held 2 weeks from today on the 9th of December. SIDS does have a very packed agenda, and I can tell you that based on the deliberations so far and the materials that we have produced due to our outreach efforts, that our products are all online. We will share the links with you, and I can assure you that many of our products, based on these seminar arrangements that we have been used quite well in terms of course delivery and finding themselves in course outlines for the purposes of instruction within the UWI and elsewhere. So we are very pleased with this. But last of all, I just want to say again, express my sincerest thanks to CARDI and to all of you who have joined the virtual audience for having chosen this event and seen the value of hosting it. And I look forward to hearing all the great pleasures that you would have derived having witnessed what we are going to convene here for all of you today. So thanks to the panelists, thanks to everyone. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, sorry for that little delay. I was trying to unmute myself. Thank you very much, Dr. St. Bernard. I think it's SIDS. This is a very well-known institute, and like a lot of people, I'm not very good at getting acronyms pronounced correctly, but Dr. Bernard said SIDS, so let's go with that for now. Now we have a welcome from CARDI. You may see that I have a CARDI badge on here. In fact, I've been retired from CARDI for a number of years, and when I opened my drawer this morning, this was the first T-shirt I saw, so I thought I'd better put it on. And nobody from CARDI has yet objected to the fact that I'm still wearing their T-shirt. So, but nevertheless, I'm not in a position to give you the opening remarks from CARDI, but we're very lucky to have Mr. Fayez Shah, who's the Manager of Science, Technology and Innovation here at CARDI, and he's going to give the opening remarks on behalf of CARDI.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Lochner. Good morning to all of the participants of this webinar. Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, the Acting Director of SIDS, the Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, Dr. Richard Blair, the Advisor to CARICOM, Agri-Food System to the Ministry of Agriculture, Guyana. I bring greetings on behalf of our Executive Director, who is currently on travel duty. CADI is extremely grateful for this opportunity that SIDS provided to participate in this, their 13th webinar series, and for this opportunity to highlight food security and nutrition security. Now, exactly what is the challenge? We are all aware of the challenges the region faces, and these will be discussed as we highlight the various imperatives that will be provided by the various panelists today. But our focus remains the 2.75 million persons out of the 7.1 million persons in the English-speaking Caribbean who remain food insecure, and also providing security to that 7.1 million persons. The second major challenge that we are seeing happening is that there's increasing inflation. We saw that there was an increase of almost 10.2% across 20 countries in 2021, with Jamaica recording 20% and 15% food price inflation, and Suriname recording as high as 68.3% food inflation. This, coupled with climate change, which our climate change panelists would highlight today, remains the major challenges and threats towards food security. At the regional level, we are all aware of the regional policy for food and nutrition security, and more recently, the special ministerial task force set up on food production and security with an implementation plan focusing on a strategy for advancing the CARICOM agri-food system agenda, prioritizing food and nutrition security. We'd have seen the two agri-investment forums that took place both in Guyana and Trinidad, and the actions that have been set at the regional level for us to move these imperatives forward towards achieving food security. Now, from a CADI perspective, we are very grateful for SIDS for providing this opportunity. And internally, we would have been addressing some aspects of the value chain and how we have been contributing to this food and security improvements. And just to highlight a few, we do work along the lines of developing value chains. We have worked specifically with hot peppers, sweet potato, cassava, and more recently, we are working along with coconuts and the CDB sweet potato project, and attempting to achieve and address issues along the value chain. We have introduced and identified various varieties of planting material, especially in commodities, including sweet potato, hot peppers, coconuts, tomato. We are currently looking at open pollinated tomato yellow leaf curl varieties. Recently in St. Vincent, we would have introduced dasheen varieties with much more climatic tolerance, including Samoa and IND 12. And at our Belize unit, we continue to produce both grain of soybean and corn, both for consumption as well as seed and planting material for the farming communities in Belize and the wider CARICOM region. We continue to maintain forage banks in various countries, and along the lines of genetic conservation, we maintain seed banks both in Belize and Barbados. We also have germplasm banks in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, Antigua, St. Lucia, and St. Kitts and Nevis. We continue to promote good agricultural practices, integrated pest management, and disease management to address some of the major crops that can contribute to food security, including sweet potato and the sweet potato weevil, and of course, the South American palm weevil and red ring disease in coconuts. Among the other root crops, we continue to do work in terms of research and increasing yields in crops such as cassava and hot pepper. Along the lines of renewable energy, we would have done numerous projects in terms of introducing solar drying technology to some of the countries under the PPCR project. And of course, CARI does have a farm in Ibini, Guyana, a 5,000-acre farm where we have started production of some fruit trees, which would serve as a agro-processing base for agro-processors in the region within the next few years. We continue to evaluate production systems for traditionally imported crops with potential for import displacement. We currently have work going on in white potatoes in Dominica, work to start in St. Kitts and Nevis in this crop, onions and broccoli in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And of course, we continue to promote biodiversity conservation and protection, which are all critical for supporting food security and economic development. So these are just some of the areas CARI would have done work. We have recognized that it cannot be done alone, and we are grateful for this facilities providing this forum to build awareness about food security. We recognize that we need to all have collective actions, and we are hoping coming out of this webinar that, we have so many partners here today. We have CABA, we have CAFA, we have the University of the West Indies, and we have, some of the leading, climate specialists in the region, all giving contributions today so that we can all at the end, come up with a way forward that can continue to ensure that we stay focused in terms of addressing food security. So on behalf of CARI, we thank all of the panelists, and thanks to everyone for taking part in this webinar, and look forward to the proceedings. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Shah. There always seems to be a gap after the speakers because I seem to have to unmute myself in two separate places. And now I think you're seeing through my glasses a reflection of myself. So I apologize for that. If I take my glasses off, that might prevent that for a moment. This is a regional seminar. This is dealing with Caribbean SIDS, small island developing states. And as we know, SIDS, CARI, both regional organizations. But if we're talking about the region, we can't leave out CARICOM. And fortunately, we have Dr. Richard Blair, who's the advisor to CARICOM on the agri-food systems, here this morning to give his opening remarks. So let's hear the views of CARICOM on this. And remember, we all follow CARICOM's leads. We go to CARICOM meetings, and that's where we get our mandate from. So Dr. Blair, can you give us your opening remarks, please?
Thank you, Chair. And you are referring to me as a CARICOM staff member. That was prior to my new appointment as advisor to the chair of the Ministerial Task Force, but still in CARICOM sphere of work. So not too far off, Bruce. Faculty members of SIDS, staff of the Caribbean Agricultural Research and Development Institute, delegates, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. Permit me first to convey the regrets of the Honorable Zulfikar Mustafa, Minister of Agriculture, who, due to a prior commitment, has asked me instead to bring these remarks. You may be aware as well that Minister Zulfikar Mustafa is the appointed chair of the Special Ministerial Task Force on Food Production and Food Security, and therefore that is where this CARICOM element comes in. This forum, Chair, is another positive signal of the Caribbean region's determination to not lose sight of the target of not only identifying the challenges, but finding sustainable solutions towards achieving regional food and nutrition security. I am particularly pleased at the diverse cross-section of themes that would be presented at this forum, representing issues of nutrition, security and health, climate change, agribusiness and the private sector, and global factors and equity in the context of the region's food and nutrition security. Chair, this is indeed useful, as the very ideas of food and nutrition security and the agriculture food system are in themselves complex and multifaceted concepts. It is therefore important that as we shape the agenda for the promotion of food security in the region, we should seek to embrace a broad front approach, one that encompasses wide representation and active involvement of all. This is absolutely crucial if we are to overcome the current challenges we face in food and nutrition security as a region. With the global population now over 8 billion and climbing, there's rising demand for food. And when coupled with inflationary pressures imposed on the globe by the Russia-Ukraine war, there must now be even greater urgency on our part, the region's part, for aggressive action. According to a fairly recent survey conducted by CARICOM and the United Nations World Food Programme, the number of persons estimated to be facing moderate to severe levels of food insecurity in the English-speaking Caribbean, the previous speaker alluded to that, rose by an alarming 46% over the 6 months leading up to August 2022, with nearly 4.1 million persons, or 57% of the population, facing food insecurity. Chair, in addressing the issue of food and nutrition security, there is definitely need for better coordination of emergency food and nutrition programs and improved early warning system in order to better respond to shocks. In particular, a common approach that builds on individual member states' production strengths will go far away in improving availability, accessibility, and affordability of food, especially for the most vulnerable. Further, as part of the region's disaster mitigation, prevention, and management policy, the establishment of emergency reserve stocks of food, seeds, and other plant genetic material will greatly assist in the stability of food supply in the region. As climate change is a given, greater emphasis must be placed on climate resilient and climate smart agriculture. Smallholder farmers as well must be mobilized to increase their productivity and production scale. To achieve this, stronger collaboration among government, research institutions, business, and farmers would need to take place in a more profound manner. At the regional level, the CARICOM Special Ministerial Task Force on Food Production and Food Security was established to advance CARICOM's agri-food system agenda. This agenda seeks to improve the regional food system using an integrated approach and a single shared vision and coordination of efforts towards sustainable transformation of the agriculture sector. Particularly, the task force targets the reduction of regional food imports of 25% by 2025 in the process of promoting an increase in production and consumption of regionally produced commodities. In this regard, heavy emphasis is being placed on, among others, the complete removal of all inter-regional barriers to trade. The chair, you'd agree with me. Even if you were to boost the production, improve production, productivity, and the food cannot get to where it is needed in the region, then you have a problem. And therefore, at the level of the ministerial task force, we're working very hard to ensure that policies that we have adopted are implemented, and we are hopefully will see the fruits of those efforts. For instance, recently adopted at the level of the COTED was the policy and movement of animal and animal products, food safety legislation, standards for about 19 products, as well as dispute policy on the dispute resolution mechanism. The chair, we see all of these are as important elements in promoting strong interregional trade among member states. Likewise, advocacy for the reform of the rules of origin and the common external tariff regime and suspension is another area of concern for the ministerial task force. And basically, the focus is on finding ways to make the rules of origin and CT regime work more to the benefit of regional producers and operators. In this respect, the CARICOM private sector organization and the business development thematic group are leading efforts in this respect. One of the products that come to mind, the multitude of requests for suspension, is the issue of desiccated coconut. I'm still wondering, and maybe I'll hear from some of the experts, why that can be provided right from among our producers right in the region. Additionally, Mr. Chair, the issue of de-risking of the agriculture sector remains a key and crucial area of concern. You would be aware that recently there were two, as a matter of fact, agri-forum that were held, one in Ghana in May, and following that, another in Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the things that arose out of the discussion on de-risking the agriculture sector was the issue of financing and agricultural insurance. And as we speak, the ministerial task force is engaging two providers of agricultural insurance as part of its program in de-risking the agriculture sector. You'd be happy to learn as well that the Republic Bank has pledged an amount of $100 million for the purpose of agricultural investment in the region. I think that is unprecedented. In all my years at the regional level, I've never heard of such an initiative, and therefore we're very happy that things are moving in that direction. Additionally, Mr. Chairman, the issue of transportation and logistics throughout the region remains a concern, and work is being undertaken as well in this respect, but particularly on the area of logistics. I know that the business development thematic group, which is part of the ministerial task force, is working assiduously to address that concern and to bring some relief to the region in this regard. The investment in production, research, and development, a front burner item in the work of the ministerial task force. And immediately that what comes to mind, for instance, is the case of production of poultry. Poultry, as you know, is one of the main protein sources in the Caribbean, and it's a heavily imported product. Part of the plans of the ministerial task force is to facilitate and put in place systems that would allow production to increase about 82,000 metric tons by year 2025. And to support that, Mr. Chairman, efforts are being undertaken as well to ramp up inputs such as corn and soy and the target in 2025 would be about 25,000 acres for the production of corn and soy right in Guyana. These are just some of the areas that the Special Ministerial Task Force has been engaged over the last year, and we are making very, very good progress in that respect. So despite many challenges, the CARICOM region is moving decisively in the right direction. We need all hands on deck to ensure food and nutrition security for our region. There's a role for all. The participation and support of all CARICOM member states, academia, the private sector, and research institutions, among others, is vital to the process. In championing the region's food and nutrition security vision, it is crucial as well that we encourage our Caribbean people to support regionally produced food and agricultural commodities and invest in regional agricultural value chains. We have the ability to transform agriculture on the ground and reshape the regional food system to alleviate hunger, end poverty, and promote sustainable development. And all of us have a vital role to play. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Blair, and for giving us that background. And I remember Dr. Blair as one of the founders of that CARICOM task force he was talking about on food security. And I'm not going to apologize for not recognizing his role these days with the Ministry of Agriculture, because in case anybody doesn't know, Guyana is responsible for agriculture on CARICOM's quasi-cabinet. So the fact that he's working paid by the Ministry of Agriculture and not by CARICOM at the moment doesn't really make any difference. His role is a CARICOM role automatically because he's in the Ministry of Agriculture in Guyana. But thank you very much, Richard, for a very clear and very good background to the speakers and this seminar this morning. Now we're coming to the section where we have, I think, 6 very, very distinguished presenters ready to present. And they all have very distinguished bios. I'm going to sort of not read the full bio because the presenters have been asked to keep to 10 minutes, which is an extremely difficult task. And I don't want to spend most of that 10 minutes introducing them. But I'll just say that when they're nearing the end of their time, I'm going to ask them and remind them that they're nearing the end of their time and ask them to try to wrap up. The first presenter is Dr. Patricia Northover, who's a staff member of SIDS in Mona, Jamaica. And she chairs the SIDS Research Cluster on Sustainable Rural and Agricultural Development. So I'd really, having said that, that's enough to introduce her. But let me just quickly say that she's a graduate of the University of Cambridge and the University of the West Indies. And her current research projects, there's a long list, but they're all very much to do with agriculture, climate action, food systems, so on and so forth. And she's also the author and co-author of several articles. It says it probably should be numerous articles and edited and volumes on a number of things, including, of course, climate change. So if I could ask Dr. Northover to begin her presentation, and please try to keep within the 10 minutes. I know it's going to be extremely difficult because I'm sure you have a lot to say, but we will attempt to keep it on time so that we can have a discussion after all the presenters have made their presentations. So Dr. Patricia Northover, over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very, very, very happy to be in such august company and to have an excellent introduction by Dr. Blair and a wonderful overview of the issues and the activities of CARDI. I want to congratulate the organizers of this event and especially my colleague, Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, for having the insight and initiative to collaborate and to put food security and food and nutritional security at the top of the agenda for SIDS. So I'm going to ask my support in the seminar to please start sharing the slideshow. Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. Again, in opening this conversation, I want to set the stage by briefly highlighting the racial ordering underpinning the crisis in the world food system. My views here are informed by my standpoint as a Black female economic philosopher and development economist from the Caribbean, leading a global South-based interdisciplinary rural research cluster based at the University of the West Indies, SIDS. My task today is to address the topic of global forces and equity in the supply of food. This is not an academic concern. As everywhere in the news and social media, on the street corners and in the shops, in our private homes and in our public governance arrangements, we have been discussing how global forces impact our food systems as we grapple with the effects of the Ukraine-Russian war and the negative COVID-19 impacts on global markets, supply chains, people's lives and livelihoods. These global disruptions have greatly increased hunger across the world and significantly worsened the food insecurity suffered in the Caribbean. Based on reports by the United Nations Food Agency, the World Food Programme, 45 million people in 43 countries worldwide are at the edge of starvation. Almost 900 million are hungry. Over 2 billion experience severe and moderate levels of food insecurity. And some 3 billion do not have access to an affordable and nutritious diet. However, global reports on hunger and food insecurity also reveal that the number of persons who are hungry and malnourished had already started to increase from 2014. Thus, given multiple global stresses, the SDG target of zero hunger by 2030 is now completely derailed. A concern with the outlook for global, regional, and national food security exists, however, not only because of income and job losses from economic shutdowns, but also because of the global price inflation impacting net food importers like Caribbean SIDS, due to the rapidly increasing prices for feed, food, and fuel. For example, the World Bank's Agricultural Price Index reveals that prices in April of this year were 43% higher than prices in January, while the FAO's Food Price Index reached its highest level since its inception in 1990. These price shocks are contemporary extensions of the FFF crises in 2008 to 2009. That is, the food, fuel, and financial crises that happened then. Today, as it was before, the rise in prices are deepening the incentives for land grabs, for food and fuel, and encouraging speculative market activity in commodity futures, which benefit fund managers in capitalist regimes, while widening income and food insecurity inequalities. Caribbean states are especially prone to the costs and contradictions of our global food system, given their historical insertion in colonial processes of global capital accumulation that left legacies of land, wealth, class, gender, and racialized social inequalities that have shaped their high levels of vulnerability to climate change, as well as their high levels of economic and food import dependency. I therefore posit in this short intervention that our global food system is indeed in a fundamental crisis, and that our Caribbean food futures calls for policy that endorses 3D thinking. That is, thinking which is divergent, disruptive, and decolonial. Indeed, as Isabella Cozile, director of the Consultative Group on International Agricultural Research, their Water, Land, and Ecosystems program, in her 2019 blog on the Scientific American Network has stressed, and I quote, "It is not only a climate crisis that we have on our hands, it is a full-blown planetary emergency. And agriculture is both a source of the problem and a potential solution." End of quote. This pivotal role emerges from the fact that agriculture and its land use systems contribute to about 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. Next slide, please. This is, if we were to consider agriculture as a country, it would be third behind the United States, China, and China. Ms. Cozile, Dr. Cozile also notes that, and I quote, "The decisions made in the next few decades will have huge ramifications for the future of our planet. And getting our food systems right is at the heart of this." End of quote. Rockstrom et al. Have also noted in a 2020 article on global food systems that there is a recent assessment of the hidden costs of global food and land use systems. This was estimated at US 12 trillion as compared with the market value of the global food system estimated at US 10 trillion. To see this another way, for every dollar now spent on food, society pays $2 in health, environment, and economic costs. This is because the plantation monocultures shaping global food systems under both colonial and neoliberal regimes are predominantly primed for agribusiness profit. Next slide, please. And are driving the destruction of biodiversity, genetic erosion, as well as loss of biocultural knowledge through the implementation of oversimplified, high input, plus chemically dependent production systems that rely on very little genetic and biodiversity. And the high inputs are fundamentally rooted on the fossil fuel import dependency as well. So this loss of agrobiodiversity leads to, among other things, high vulnerability to viruses, funguses, bacterium, and nematodes, high vulnerability to climatic events, and high vulnerability to global market fluctuations. It is thus of grave concern that the world currently depends on only 12 plants and 5 animals to supply 75% of the world's food supply, while of the 250,000 plant species that could be used for agriculture, less than 3% are used. And of the 30,000 edible plant species, only 150 are used. To make matters worse, our food system is also the driver for unhealthy populations. Accordingly, as pointed out again by Rockstrom et al. In their 2020 article, unhealthy food is the world's biggest killer, with diet-related chronic diseases estimated to be responsible for 11 million premature deaths in 2017 alone, end of quote. It is clear then that we have a dysfunctional global food system. However, what is not always made transparent is that certain bodies, spaces, and places that are rooted in a history of colonial and racial violence bear the brunt of these crises. As noted in the 2020 Global Report on Food Crises, in 2019, that is, before the COVID-19 pandemic, 135 million persons in 55 countries were in food crisis or worse, with half of those bodies being in Africa. And within the Caribbean, the Afro-descendant people of Haiti continue to dwell with the fact that they live under an unnatural lockdown of extreme poverty and precarity of life. Next slide, please. Indeed, Haiti suffers from the highest hunger rate in the Caribbean region at 47% compared to a regional average of 16% in 2020, with, unfortunately, Haitian children facing the highest rates of malnutrition. As we all know, Haiti is in a major crisis with cholera epidemic resurfacing. And again, it is the Haitian children who have the highest rate of mortality in this fundamental crisis. Our globalization processes then have set off not only a metabolic rift with nature, as mooted in the concept of the Anthropocene, but also a racialized political rift with existing non-European social forms of life. As such, this has led scholars such as Davis et al. To call for the centrality of racial ordering by advocating for the concept of the Plantationocene. Here, the underlying drivers of climate change is located in the logics of environmental modernization, homogenization, and control that has been developed in historical plantations, as well as in its legacies of racial disordering. However, an even more forthright argument has been put forward by Catherine Youssef, and she calls for the recognition of 1 billion Black Anthropocenes. This concept seeks to bear witness not only to the deadly racial divisions accompanying capitalism, but also to the distinction introduced between the human and the non-human, in which value and agency are expropriated from both nature and Black bodies. Finally, as highlighted in Finally, as highlighted in my recent co-edited text, Race and Rurality in the Global Economy, with Michaeline Critchlow et al., these historical racialized processes remain central within contemporary global transformations. Next slide, please. And continues to shape the character of and experiences in our rural spaces. So, just how do we unsettle this inequitable food system created in the Plantationocene, if you will, the Capitalocene, if you want, or 1 billion Black Anthropocenes, as we in the Caribbean fully recognize? At a minimum, I argue that for global equity in our existing food systems, one needs 3D thinking. In brief, next slide, please. thinking that is divergent. For example, introducing greater reliance on transdisciplinary perspectives to support food systems, such as the agroecological approach. Disruptive, for example, pursuing a more progressive agenda beyond the World Trade Organization or the World Bank's support of neoliberal international trade regimes, and for pivoting to support the 2018 United Nations Declaration for the Rights of Peasants and Other Peoples working in rural areas that enshrines the principle of food sovereignty. And lastly, 3D thinking is decolonial. This requires an undermining of the hegemonic epistemic orderings and narratives on efficiency and productivity, as well as countering racial and colonial orderings of property that facilitate the extractivist and expulsive logics of accumulation. So while a green revolution ushered in fundamental increases in agrarian productivity, it also issued in fundamental destruction of our ecosystems, land, environment, and global racial inequalities. So we need a 3D thinking approach, which I argue has been exemplified in the global food sovereignty movements that has been spearheaded by La Via Campesina. And this food sovereignty movement demand, could you return to the last slide, please? Is for the right of peoples to autonomously produce healthy, nutritious, climatically and culturally appropriate food using local resources and through agroecological means, primarily to address the food needs of their communities. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Northover. And I really think you've set the scene there. You've really told us what is the problem at the moment, particularly in the Caribbean. Our agriculture perhaps is based too much on the historical past rather than the present. You mentioned the issue of health. You certainly brought to the fore that there's a lot of agricultural products which we don't use. We concentrate on a few products, and that is not good for the climate, for the health of the population, and for the future of the Caribbean and the future of society in general. So thanks very much, Dr. Northover. The next speaker is Mr. Vassal Stewart. Now, I'm sure that he will attempt to point out that at least the Caribbean Agribusiness Association, who he's the CEO of, is aware of these problems and is dealing with them. Well, I was going to say to some extent, but he's certainly dealing with them. I've known Vassal for a long time, so I think that he would agree with most of what Dr. Northover said. Vassal is an agribusiness and international marketing development specialist with over 40 years of diversified and practical experience. And as I said, he's now the CEO of CABA, which is the Caribbean Agricultural Business Association, I think. He will correct me if I'm wrong, but CABA. And he's also the CEO and director of Woodsman Caribbean Limited, which is an agri-food processing company. So it's very important that we bring processing into this as well. He holds a number of qualifications, an EMBA International Marketing in Entrepreneurship. He has a postgraduate technology and diploma in food technology, certificate in quality management, BSc in agriculture, and certificates in marketing management. So Vassal, I don't want to say too much more. There's a long bio I have here. Please try to keep your presentation to round about 10 minutes, and it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Let me start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to participate. You'll find my voice is a little bit hoarse. I'm recovering from the cold, so I apologize for that at the outset. Let me just get my slide up and running. Right, so I want to thank both Cardi and the university for the opportunity to participate in this very important discourse. As you all recognize, the agribusiness sector has suddenly become the golden child. Everyone now recognizes the importance that many of us over the last 3 decades have been advocating. I think at very last, given the challenges with our food supply, has brought the agricultural sector back to center stage. I was asked to speak on the issue of agribusiness, promoting farming, and I think aquaculture. In responding to that, however, I want to make the point that agribusiness, in fact, involves both farming and aquaculture. So in effect, what I want to speak to is the issue of promoting agribusiness in general. And in saying that, to make it clear that though we often think of the agricultural sector or agribusiness largely in terms of food production, the sector extends way beyond that. And so to provide you with our understanding, at least from a perspective of Cabo, we see the sector in a much wider context. We see it in terms of the health and nutrition component, in terms of the industrial component, and growing. So we see that insofar as environmental issues are concerned, the sector is becoming even more important. So when we look at the sector, we ought not to see it in a clustered way in terms of it being a focus on food security, or the much broader context of the agribusiness sector. In terms of the health and nutrition component, we are looking at food, which is the center of our discussion. But feed has to be part of that. The medicinal aspect, and Dr. Northoff spoke about the challenges we have with NCDs, and food is in fact our medicine. And we're seeing growing interest and necessity to look at the agro-recreational tourism component, which is integrating agriculture and food with tourism and entertainment. In terms of the industrial market component, the need for us to see that the agricultural sector provides means of producing a range of chemicals that are utilized in the sector, the need for focus on the machinery and equipment, the importance of fuel. The sector also allows us to produce a range of lumber and garments. If you look at the situation with our historic involvement in cotton production, for example. Then look at the third component in terms of the environment protection aspect of the sector, ornamentals production, major industry in some countries, and in fact, there are tremendous opportunity in the Caribbean, including here in Trinidad. Production of biofertilizer, the importance of using tree crops for soil conservation, and increasingly the problem we have with global warming, and recognizing the importance of agriculture, both in terms of its negative contribution as well as its positive contribution. So point I want to make here is that in looking at the agribusiness sector, we have to see it in a much wider context than just the food security aspect, and indeed recognizing that the linkage between food production and the other aspects are important, because very often to ensure the sustainability of the food production, we need to look at the other components of the sector. And then let me seek to provide some clarity about how we should view this whole issue of promoting the sector. We have to see it in, I would say, in two very broad contexts, one being the demand side of the sector, the second being the supply side. And as you know, for this, any endeavor to be self-sustaining, you have to be careful how you build the demand side into the initial aspect of the business. So the demand side of a sector, in fact, is as important, and one may even argue more important than the supply side, because if the demand is not there, then you can't justify the supply. To begin with, we think we need to understand that in promoting the sector, public policy and strategies become extremely important. We need to recognize that the agricultural sector goes beyond food and nutrition, as I said before. We have to look at its impact on reducing the challenges we have in the health sector and the very high capital outlay the government has to make in terms of dealing with issues relating to health, agricultural contribution to rural development, the need for us to link it to the manufacturing sector, to link it to tourism. In promoting it, we also have to recognize that unless we create the market opportunities through prudent trade policies, that we will not be able to create the market, even for our focus on our food security and reducing food imports. If the market opportunities are not there and the market opportunities are not viable, the investment to increase our food production will in fact not take place. And again, a reference was made to the food security and its linkage to WTO. And if we don't utilize the opportunities we have, for example, to declare some of our products as special products that would allow us to use appropriate financial and economic instruments to protect our farmers, then again, we will not see the potential to achieve 25 by 25 being a realistic objective. We have to invest in research and development, as was mentioned, especially given the changes that are taking place in the sector in terms of movement into the digital world. Mention was made again of the growth in the international population and what that implies for us in terms of greater demand for food. The changes in the demographics, 12% of the world population will be over 65 by 2030. And the implications of that in terms of the diet that will be required by people over that age group and the kind of food that will be required and their consumption habits, how those will change and how our production systems will have to be adjusted to meet that change in demographic. We have to recognize as well that most of the demand is going to be in Africa and Asia. And our focus, especially when it comes to issues of export, has largely been focused on North American and the European market. We are going to find that opportunities are going to be evolving in Africa and in Asia. And only recently I saw where there's now going to be direct air linkage between the Caribbean and Africa, which will provide us with significant opportunities to look at those markets. As I said before, there's increasing demand for healthier products. Consumers are looking at whether their products are safe, whether the practices are transparent in terms of use of inputs and the impact on global warming, and the need for traceability systems to be put in place. Also on the demand side, we have to recognize that the changes that took place during COVID will continue, will persist, and in fact will expand. The need for online marketing and the extent to which social media will expand and impact on our ability to market our products. The fact that this will also create greater opportunities for SMEs in terms of getting products to market and in attracting attention to their outputs. This will in fact begin to disrupt the market in terms of traditional practices. We'll see that changes will take place within the traditional food distribution system. Retailers will have less power. They will probably see greater consolidation taking place. We'll see the retailers themselves getting involved in backward linkages. We're seeing that in fact here in Trinidad as distribution channels like the Massey chain has become more involved in backward linkages. We'll see more of that taking place. It will have both positive and negative impact on our food sector as it will begin to displace some of the distributors in the system. But what we need to recognize in that regard is the fact that the technologies in the system now, or the new technologies, will begin to have significant impact on production and trade. Also, we need to recognize that as the food sector changes, there are going to be more involvement in terms of new regulations. And we'll find that unless our players, both at the primary, secondary, and tertiary levels in the food system, are able to adjust their production strategies and be able to implement international trade requirements in terms of good agricultural practices, HACCP systems in the food service and food production, especially in value-added area, that we are not going to be able to access many of the markets, especially export markets. So those are areas that we have to begin to promote in terms of making investments to allow our small farmers or small SMEs to access the resources to put these systems in place if we are to continue to access our markets. On the supply side now, let's take a look at that and see what is required in order to ensure that we have the capacity to meet these changing aspects of the demand side. There's going to be increasing need to invest in collective post-harvest and farm infrastructure. Our small farmers, as I mentioned before, will need to put in place all these global quality management systems, and independently, they'll find great challenges in achieving these. So what we are promoting is government getting involved, or even the private sector, in providing infrastructure, preferably in a collective way that allows for collective sharing of post-harvest infrastructure. A good example of that is what is being done in countries like Jamaica, where there are agro-farms or agro-parks, where the government invests in developing the infrastructure, roads, drainage, irrigation system, packing houses, and leave the actual production to farmers. But they are able to share the investment that is required in packing houses, in infrastructure on the farm, and in quality management systems that allows them to meet the international marketing opportunities. There ought to be a greater need for training in human capital, especially in the ministries, to allow the new extension officers to have the capacity to train farmers, given that we are more moving into a far greater use of smart technologies. For example, traditionally we would have tractor pools that would allow farmers to have access to mechanized production systems. What is now going to be required is perhaps things like drone pools that will allow farmers to have access to the tremendous disruption that the drone technology will bring to the production system. Again, individually, they are unable to perhaps make the investment, but through collective arrangements, either through private sector participants or through public sector, get access to these new technologies. There'll be need for new financial incentives to get the private sector to invest in the sector, not so much now on the basis of a traditional approach of heavy dependence on collateral, but to focus more on looking at the whole value chain and the issue of de-risking that was mentioned earlier. With the new technologies, we are able now to manage many of the externalities that would impact on risk. And therefore, one of the things that we are advocating in CARBA is for both the development banks and where possible commercial banks to begin to look at this, not only in terms of issues of collateral, but the strength of the value chain. And I think Richard mentioned earlier on that companies like Republic Bank committing to invest in the sector. We think that in doing so, they need to take a different approach and to view investment in specific opportunities, in specific companies, not so much on the traditional basis of strong collateral, but strong value chains. The fact that high-tech agricultural production systems is going to become the norm, and we have to position ourselves and promote the adoption of these new technologies. Again, as I said before, it will require significant public-private partnership in allowing our small farmers to access these. A number of new technologies, I mentioned drone, satellite technology, remote sensors, and the tremendous impact that these are going to have in providing more information, more knowledge that will allow us to better manage again the risks that I mentioned earlier. These are also very applicable in the livestock industry. Increasing use of artificial intelligence that will allow us to gather far more information, to analyze the information more quickly, and to give us better understanding of the variables that impact on the sector. And very often that will give us information very early so we can take preventative action in a more timely basis. Greater use of robotics, and that is going to become the norm, whether you are a small farmer or a large farmer. And again, how do we provide the resources and the appropriate institutional arrangements to ensure that our farmers can access these new technologies? I've laid out again here a number of different types of technologies that are applicable. What is going to become even more important as we look at our food distribution, again for export, as well as domestic, is the need for traceability systems and the increasing use of blockchain as a basis for that. Again, very high level technologies. How do we ensure that our farmers are able to access this and to do so in a way that is sustainable. You're going to find that the use of inorganic fertilizer is going to become, and not just the fertilizer, but all inorganic chemicals. Will need to reduce those, not only in terms of the impact on the environment, but impact on our health. We are going to find that we need to go back to more traditional production systems, using mixed crop and livestock farming. If we don't make those transition and provide the kind of support to our farmers, we're going to find not only are we going to become even more exposed to unhealthy food and the increasing NCDs that is characterized in the region, but that the cost of our food is going to become more challenging as the price of inorganic inputs increases. So the changes that are going to be necessary and the things that we'll have to promote will have to revolve around us moving, in some instances, back to the future in using systems that we've abandoned. The need for diversity was mentioned, the need for reduction of inorganic inputs. How do we change the current environment to allow our farmers to go back to that system, and what type of support would be required? Again, looking at the supply side, we're seeing greater use of biological controls. We know what happened when we had the major problem in the region with pink mealybug and how we were able to solve that using natural enemies. We're going to find that becoming more and more critical part of our crop protection systems. Use of insects in providing food inputs in terms of feed for the livestock industry is going to become an area of great interest, and in fact may become an area of necessity, as it will, in our view, it's going to become less expensive to produce insects for feed than it probably do we have now in producing plant material, whether it's soya bean or corn. And this again is an area that will have to begin to provide training and investments to put us ahead of the curve. We are already seeing significant increase in control atmosphere production systems. This is going to become more perverse. Linked to that, we are going to have increased emphasis on non-renewable energy sources, because it's the high cost of energy that will make our involvement in this subsector more challenging. So investment in non-renewables is going to become an increasing part of the sector. In terms of production at the value-added level, we're seeing, again, the need to reduce the use of preservatives in our food, and investments will have to take place in adoption of the new technology in using high-pressure processing, which will allow us to process our food and prevent the use of chemicals while managing the risk of deterioration of the food by using high-pressure processing. Secondly, we are going to have to look at the use of ozonation as another means of reducing the use of chemicals in our food. All of these are emerging areas where both at the public sector and the private sector, we now have to provide not just the information, but the support systems to allow for the transition of our primary producers, as well as our producers who are involved in value addition, to be able to adopt these new technologies, to do so in a way that would allow for long-term sustainability, which means not just in terms of profitability, but also in terms of the social and environmental impact. So going forward, we're seeing a very changed sector. We're seeing a level of necessary but impactful disruption that, in fact, though some may see them as being negative, in our view, in Cabo, we see a lot of positive sides, because what that will allow is for SMEs and small players to use the technology to level the playing field. We recognize that in making that transition, however, there's going to be a need for public sector support. There's going to be a need for changing in how our banks, whether they are development banks or commercial banks, provide funding to the sector. So I'm showing you what I think the future will look like. Digital technologies will become an increasing and necessary and critical part of the entire food system. And we in the region have to begin to adjust to that reality. We're going to see far more production that is going to be undercover or under controlled atmosphere conditions. that will lead to tremendous increase in productivity, safer foods, give us greater control over the production variables so that we could reduce risk from farm to table. It should make our food system stronger, give us greater capacity to reduce the risk and to become more, to better position us to attract investment, whether in terms of debt or equity investment. So the technologies and the disruptions, though they may seem to be negative, in our view, are going to have very positive impact if we put the systems in place to support our small farmers. We're going to see greater levels of productivity, which will strengthen our ability to compete both in our own markets and extra-regionally. We're going to see greater linkages between agricultural production and food production along the chain, linking to tourism, and the extent to which that is going to create greater profitability at the enterprise level and at the sectoral level. We expect to see greater participation, both from the NGOs that are going to actually be impactful in driving the change, because you see what's happening, for example, in global warming. Much of the pressure for change is coming from the NGOs. We're going to see that they are going to have a greater impact on how the food systems globally, but also here in the region, will have to change. So just to wrap up, point I want to make in terms of how we promote the sector is to recognize that there are tremendous changes taking place in terms of the technology to begin with, and that this will have positive impact if we prepare ourselves, if we provide the kind of institutional arrangements that would allow our SMEs, and we have to recognize that 70 to 80% of our food are produced by small and micro entities, whether they are farmers or they're involved in value addition. And therefore, in promoting the sector, those are the issues that we have to bring to the attention of the policymakers, to the attention of the development agencies, to the attention of the financial agencies, and where we are looking for investment from private parties, for them also to have an understanding of what it's going to take to engage in the kind of production levels that will get us to 25 by 25. So once again, Chair, I want to thank you. I want to thank the organizers for the opportunity. We at CABA are willing, ready, and in many cases able to provide some of the drivers to the changes that we are recommended, and we look forward to working with our partners. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Basil. You're a little over time there, but well, you're full of energy as always, and as you say, you've been trying for decades to get your message across, and I think that now perhaps people realize that they need to listen to you a little bit more than they have been for the last 30, 40 years. So thanks very much, Basil, for a very provocative, shall I say, presentation. The next presenter is Mr. Steve Maxime, who's an EU-recognized senior expert on climate change and agriculture. Not only EU, by the way, somebody earlier reminded us that the EU has been supporting agriculture in the region. He's doing a lot of support to agriculture in the region. I think we need to recognize that and thank the EU for their support. As I say, Steve Maxime is an EU-recognized expert on on climate change and agriculture. Not only EU-recognized, Steve, but certainly Caribbean-recognized. He's a former PAHO consultant on food and nutrition surveillance and has been a long-standing advocate of One Health and nutrition security. He's worked in 15 CARICOM countries, and his talk this morning is on climate change implications for food security. Now, we know that climate change is a big problem. It's here with us. From what we've seen in Egypt last week or the week before, it's not going to go away. It's going to get worse. The big countries are reluctant to do anything about it, apart from promise to throw money at it, which may or may not materialize. So, Steve, please give us your presentation.
Sure, I'm starting my timer, Bruce, so that should give you some comfort. It's set at 10 minutes. Okay, so I've been asked to speak about climate change implications for food security, but at the onset, I want to say that I disagree with my own topic, because what we already ought to be discussing is the climate crisis impacts on nutrition security. We are way past climate change. As you heard previously, we're into the climate crisis. We're way past implying, because we are actually seeing and measuring the impacts, and we are way past food security. In terms of food security and nutrition security, I want to alert decision makers to the not so subtle differences between the two. There's this regional obsession with a benchmark 2100 calorie diet that goes against my fiber, goes against my core. My bias has been entrenched from my days 4 decades ago, where I was a PAHO consultant in food and nutrition surveillance, and I've seen the changes in terms of nomenclature and otherwise, even within Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of school feeding, as opposed to the school nutrition program. The climate crisis affects every aspect of food value chains, and Vassal started talking about the value chains, but unfortunately, our food value chains often begin outside of the Caribbean, and the issues include procurement, transportation, and distribution. And our local production has quantity and quality parameters associated with it as well. So a major determinant of food availability within CARICOM is foreign exchange. And we have seen what these extreme climate events, and sometimes not so extreme climate events like a stationary system, can have on GDP. So these food exporting countries have all been challenged by climate impacts, either directly in terms of droughts, flooding, and other hydrometeorological impacts, but also indirectly. Someone mentioned earlier the 2008 food crisis. Part of that involved diversion of some of the traditional staples towards biofuels, etc. In terms of transportation and distribution, energy prices have impacted international transportation, with renewable energy only being important for overland trips. We saw more than a decade ago, the major supermarkets in the UK, the Tesco's of this world, changing their distribution and transportation patterns from lorries to trains, where they were looking to reduce the carbon footprint of the food. Even within locally produced distribution networks and value chains, we have problems, and Basil started mentioning some of them, in terms of distribution networks within the importing country. And these are challenged by climate change impacts, the disruption of your infrastructure, by sea level rise, again, hydrometeorological events. Our seaports and airports, and especially the warehousing associated with it, a lot of it is below sea level. So typically with inundation, we either get flooding, or in the steeper territories, the impact of landslides. So what are some of these local production quantity determinants? We have seen that local crop, livestock, and fisheries outputs have measurably negatively been impacted through a range of hydrometeorological events, including things of ridge to reef significance. When we think of ridge to reef concerns, farmers on hillsides face a range of climate-induced issues, but they, in sequence, influence what happens at the lower limits, and eventually what happens in your reefs, what happens in your fish spawning grounds, etc. So that our local production has been impacted in a quantitative way by the climate events. What about the quality determinants? A lot of the adaptation options that involve soilless culture raise nutritional concerns, including the relationship between soil microbiome and gut microbiome. And I'm saying, I'm hitting you these teasers so that when we get to the actual part of this discussion, we will have a frame for that discussion. The improper use of compost and manures. I mean, there have been increases in H. pylori infections. There have been cases, well-documented cases of increased leptospirosis because of the improper use and preparation of compost. And then there are the syndemic implications of your NCDs, your non-communicable diseases, and the NDCs, which is the nationally determined contributions. And you would probably marvel at the links between those two, in that in our attempts to produce ever increasing, ever more ambitious NDCs, or nationally determined contributions, we have tried to cut and shave from areas that may have compromised our attempts to improve nutrition security, as opposed to a 2100 calorie base food security. So there's high-end recognition of food miles in the tourism sector. So there's good news. Some of the adaptive and mitigative uses of comprehensive, notice, I repeat, comprehensive climate smart agriculture have borne fruit. And when we get into the discussion, hopefully we'll be able to talk about some of those. And there are some climate justice related, and this would be of extreme importance to Pat, climate justice related impact in terms of debt climate action swaps, your blue bonds, and a whole range of a suite of financial and other instruments that have been linked to climate justice concerns that we've been promoting, more aggressively in the last 5 years, I would think. And then Richard, Vassal, everybody mentioned the 25 by 2025 initiative, but my word of caution there is this, and this is my parting shot with more than 3 minutes to spare. If nutrition security is based on foreign exchange availability and a robust complementary contribution from a comprehensive, I repeat, a comprehensive climate smart agriculture, then initiatives like 20 by 2025 must focus on a reduction, listen to me carefully, on a reduction of the food import bill based on nutrient loading and not on price. Let me repeat that. That is my parting shot. If nutrition security is based on foreign exchange availability and a robust complementary contribution from comprehensive climate smart agriculture, then initiatives like 20 by 2025 must focus on a reduction of the food import bill based on nutrient loading and not on price, because we are well aware of the number of empty calories that make their way onto those food import bill computations. I thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Steve. And you remain my good friend because you kept within your 10 minutes and you didn't give me any horrors at all. So our friendship is even stronger after that. I mean, we've known each other for I don't know how many years, but our friendship is getting stronger all the time.
Thank you, my friend.
The next speaker is Ms. Charmaine Metibe. Well, we've been hearing about health. I mean, I think Dr. Northo mentioned the problem of healthy food, and Ms. Charmaine Metivier is going to be talking about nutrition and health. And in fact, that also follows on from, I think, what Steve was saying about nutrition loading. I think that is also a factor in unhealthy food. I think that he didn't put it that way, but I mean, I think that's what he was talking about. Ms. Metivier is a research fellow with the Center for Health Economics at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine. And her research interests are in health financing, national health insurance, and universal coverage, health economics, particularly pertaining to chronic non-communicable diseases, aging, HIV and AIDS. And she's also concerned about sugar-sweetened beverages and the need to put taxation on them and so on. So Charmaine, if I could ask you to give your presentation, and perhaps you can take a little bit of advice there, or follow Steve's advice, or Steve's, not his advice, but his leadership by trying to keep yourself to within the 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Bruce. And yes, I will be taking 10 minutes. So I will follow Steve's footsteps at that. So I'm just going to bring up my slides quickly. And while I do that, I just want to say thank you to everyone for having the HU Center for Health Economics represented at this forum. So, okay. So is everyone, are you seeing the slides?
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. So I've been asked to talk on nutrition and health. So in terms of nutrition and health, I'm going to take a little bit of a different perspective where I would look at the food choice determinants, provide an overview, give you some highlights of a study which we did in 3 countries, actually throughout the Caribbean, where we looked at eating patterns and some food choice determinants. And I'll give you some results of those studies. I'll go into some of the health trends, give you a snapshot of some of the health trends in the Caribbean, and then I'll try to link some of that with the nutrition and health to food security, excuse me. All right, so getting into it. So when we talk about food choice determinants, there are different types of determinants. We will see there are biological determinants, which really focus on the aspect of taste and your appetite. There are the social determinants, which look at the culture, your family, your peers, and your habits, things that you've been grown into and so forth. The economic determinants of what you decide to eat relate to things regarding cost, income, and availability of these foods. We also have the attitudes, beliefs, and knowledge, which more or less speaks to your religious beliefs and your nutritional value. And then there are the physical determinants of what you eat, and those relate to how you access food, what is accessible or not, and the time it will take to prepare foods and so forth. And those are some of what we'll call the general food choice determinants. So as I said, I'll give you a brief of some results, which we did. We did some studies in Jamaica. We also did it in St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Vincent, where we actually did a study on eating patterns and food choice determinants. And what we were looking at, we were really looking at what people, the typical diets of persons, and what were their main determinants of their dietary choices. And from that, we were able to make different inferences and so forth. So having said that, what we found was that the general trend in the country is tending to be about the same. So I'll give you a review of some of it. With respect to eating patterns, what we found was that most people reported that they were eating healthily, just slightly above those who thought that they didn't eat as healthily. So we saw in this case in Jamaica that 49% of the persons who we surveyed thought that they actually ate healthy, with the balance thinking that they actually ate unhealthily. And this, as I want to say, is a perception, people's perception of how they ate. So they were asked to actually provide their responses in terms of how they thought that their eating patterns were. So in terms of the gender effect, we found that females were more likely to describe themselves as generally eating unhealthy as compared to their male counterparts. And with respect to the age, we found that as people got older, they tended to eat more healthily. So we found that persons who reported eating unhealthy were those persons in the younger age group. And if we were to look at the age group 18 to 24 years old, we saw that 58% of those persons surveyed found themselves to be unhealthy eaters, or reported themselves to be unhealthy eaters, while 42% said that they ate healthily. And you can see that the percentages change as persons got older. So those persons who are 55 years and over, they said 64% of them said that they ate healthier than those 36% reporting eating unhealthily. So this shows those persons who were surveyed and of those persons who identified as unhealthy eaters, we will ask them what were some of the reasons why they thought they ate unhealthily. And this is the results. So you would see leading it, 64% of the responders of those persons who indicated eating unhealthy diets said that unhealthy foods were more accessible. And that was followed by persons who said that they had limited time to prepare healthy meals. That was 61% of the respondents saying that. And then we, of course, we have the issue of personal habit. 53% of the respondents ate unhealthy simply because it was their personal habits. And then when we go down to unhealthy foods cost less, we saw that 52% of persons said so. So I'll move on quickly. When we further looked at the different determinants, when we look at the economic determinants, we saw that your income played a role in how you eat. And what we found in terms of the income groups, you'll see the income bands at the bottom on the left side. The income groups, lower income respondents were more affected by these different economic factors. So you will see on this side that for persons in the income group 16,000 to 8, and this is in Jamaican dollars, 40% of them said that the unhealthy foods cost less. And if we move on, you see as the trend, as you move further down, you'll see that persons who earn more was less impacted with this result. Similarly, when we were asking people why they ate unhealthy, people said that it was what they could afford. And again, we see that those persons in the lower income brackets were the persons that that said that this is what they can afford, and this is why because of their income brackets, this is why they chose to eat unhealthy diets. In terms of the cost impacts, we saw that the impact of cost, the cost of foods, unhealthy foods, as you aged, the cost impacts tended to fade away. So the younger you were, you tended to have more of an unhealthy diet, but as you got older, you started to probably see the effects of your unhealthy habits, and you started eating healthier. And the cost was an important factor, whereby as you age, it also meant that we can infer that it also meant you had higher income levels as you aged, as you got more into your professions and so. So it meant that the cost factor wasn't as stringent to you, or the barrier to you, as you were when you were in the younger age groups. Again, when we look at some of the social and physical determinants, when they talk about your time to prepare healthy foods, people said that they had limited time to prepare healthy foods, and we found that the younger respondents were more affected by these physical determinants. Those who said they had unhealthy foods were more accessible. Again, we saw that those persons in the younger age groups tended to fall towards accessing unhealthy foods simply because they were more accessible. So moving along quickly. So having given you a snapshot of those results, now we're trying to now present to you what are the characteristics now in terms of people's health. So what we found is that if you take a look at the trends in obesity, so over the period 1970 up until 2016, what you found is that in adult obesity, you can see the trends in terms of an upward trend in the prevalence of obesity in adults. If you disaggregate it by male, female, you will realize that adult females, their prevalence of obesity was higher than male, but overall it's trending upwards. The diagram on the right simply shows the same thing. But what you can gauge from this, it is an upward trend, and it's continuing that way unless we do something differently. And this is the prevalence of obesity in children. Again, you can see it's an upward trend from 1970 up until 2016. The difference really is that if you look at the disaggregation between male and female, you will see that the prevalence of obesity between the male and female children, they're almost on par. Whereas in the previous slide, you had higher obesity levels in females than in males. But for children, you're seeing that both male and female almost on equal scales. Now, this slide is, it has a lot of information on it, but really the intention of this slide is to support some information with respect to some indicators of health and compare some of the countries that we have in the Caribbean with what's happening out there in the international countries. So we do have some comparative countries, Canada and the US. We just spoke about childhood obesity and adult obesity. So if we were to look at if we put them together, adult obesity and overweight, this is 2016 data from different sources that would have been pulled. But look at us, our total, our percentage of adults who are obese and overweight in Dominica, 60.3%, 55% in St. Vincent. And you can see comparing these to the Canada and the US, we're not very far off, where we see in Canada at 64.1 and USA at 67.9. If we move over to female obesity, you can see that female obesity and overweight is pretty high in our region. We're actually on par with what's going on in the international world. And in some cases, we've actually surpassed what's happening in some of the countries. If we look at children, the percentage of children who are 5 to 12-year-old who's overweight. Look at the percentages. We're seeing 39.1 in Jamaica, comparing those to countries like Canada and US, 18.5 and 20.5% respectively. But then we talk about NCDs. Look at some of our NCD factors. The probability of dying between the age group 30 to 70 years due to non-communicable diseases, 21% in Trinidad and Tobago, 23% in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So this really tells you that we do have an issue with our health. And a lot of it is coming from what we eat. And then, of course, that translates into what do we need to spend on health. And you see the different expenditures as a percentage, health expenditure as a percentage of GDP on the right column. Some countries very low, Antigua 2.3, whereas we're saying that we have different benchmarks and we're way below those benchmarks. Now, just to bring in some issues with respect to sales, and we're talking about ultra-processed foods and drinks. So this slide shows the change between 2002 and 2016 in global sales of ultra-processed food and drinks. And I want to focus you on these bar graphs here, where we see Latin America and the Caribbean for food. Look at where we are, ultra-processed foods, the percentage change between 2002 and 2016. Look for drinks, ultra-processed drinks. Latin America and the Caribbean, we're one of the highest actually showing in the graphs during that period and change in terms of the change in these ultra-processed sales of ultra-processed foods and drinks. So having said all of that, I want to come down to exactly what is the crux of the matter, which we're talking about food security and why I gave that whole context with respect to food, some of our health statistics, some of our eating patterns and trends that we found in the region. And we talk about food security, but what is the pathway? It's not just about food security. It is about having the right foods for food security. And I think what we need to do is look at how do we provide that right food and create the demand for those right foods and able to be able to get to food security. And when we speak about food security, I want to bring in the element of bearing in mind we want to have healthy populations. So the trigger really is to look at demand and supply. And like Vasil, I do have some supply side things I think we can look at and some demand side items. So in terms of us supplying the food and supplying the right foods and supplying healthy foods, when we talk about food security, we want to have foods, yes, for our population. We don't want populations to be undernourished or have lack of food and so, but we also want to know that the food that is provided to them are ones that are full of nutritious content and so forth. So I think one of the solutions on the supply side of food is to examine the foods that we import, the ones that we manufacture, and the ones that we locally grow. A lot of the focus at today's session talk about the local foods that we would grow and so forth. And generally, of course, you know, we're into the provisions and the peppers and the different things, which are fine. But when we talk about imports and manufacturers of food, of these ultra processed foods, the foods that are high in saturated fats, sugars, and salt, we now need to put things in place that would now control or reduce those imports or those that are manufactured and circulated around our region. And how do we do that? We have to use the policy and the legislative measures that protect our consumers from making these unhealthy choices, from putting it out there, right? And we use measures such as taxation for things that are not good for us. So we want to have high taxes on those things that would deter persons from demanding them, wanting to consume them. But on the other hand, we also need to have the incentives for healthy products. For those persons who choose to eat healthy, for those manufacturers and producers who choose to produce and grow healthy foods, we need to find some way to motivate them, to give them incentives to continue. And of course, we also have to use the different types of things that are available to us through policy. For example, there's the front of package labeling thing that's going on right now. Well, for the last couple of years about putting information on packages and ensuring that we use a system that is suitable to us. We also have to talk about product reformulation. So it's not about putting manufacturers and so out of business, but it's about how do you work with them to reformulate their products so that it's now healthier to be provided to consumers. And of course, there's a whole strength of advertising and promotion of these healthy products. We know that billions of dollars are spent every year on promoting products that are not good for us. So we need to start looking at what do we do to discourage those kinds of advertising and to promote advertising and change the redirect things to healthier products. And so those are some of the things I think on the supply side. But when we look at the demand side, and this is my last slide on the demand side, is that we would want to, because what people produce or what is produced is as a result of what is demanded. Essentially, we have to take a look at the demand side. And demand side really starts with what the consumer, because we're the consumers, all of us make up the population. And if it is that we're saying that we can just adjust or twinkle or influence consumers' taste, of course, starting with the very young, we can see that trend towards healthier eating habits as they grow into adulthood and so forth. Of course, we have to implement measures that promote healthy eating. And of course, we always talk about healthy eating, but it's not in a vacuum. It has to be done with other things like exercise, educating people on how do you read labels and so forth. And then the whole thing that just the last point that ties it all up, we saw in the results for the country studies that we did, that price and access, those were major concerns driving why people eat unhealthily. So we need to actually put in some focused measures to address price and access concerns. And what we can do to increase access to healthy foods, we can use some of those price and convenience strategies with respect to those, to restrict the access. And what we can do is restrict access through the use of unhealthy food policies that we see, for example, like some schools and some business places where they regulate the sale of unhealthy products in the environment. And in those workspaces and schools and so forth. But just to summarize, what I'm saying is that food security, yes, we all want to make sure that we have food, but we also need to make sure that however we design our policies and our procedures and our methods and mechanisms and so forth to have food security in our region has to be also driven by the kinds of foods that we actually put out there for people to consume, for people to demand. And then that will now have filtering effects with respect to the health outcomes and so forth, with respect to our economic growth, our economic development, the less burdens on our health system and so forth. And with that, I say I thank you. And now I think, Basil, you did a bit better job than I did. Thank you so much. Back to you, Bruce.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Metavier. We're keeping on this theme of healthy nutrition with the next speaker, who's Miss Abigail Caleb, who's a Senior Technical Officer, Food Security and Nutrition at the Caribbean Public Health Agency here in Trinidad. And Miss Abigail's background is in public health, in nutrition and diabetics. And as I already said, she's now working at CARFA. Apparently she's fluent in English and Spanish. I hope she's going to speak in English today, because if she's going to speak in Spanish, I might find it a little bit difficult to follow. Before you start, Abigail, I apologize for sending you a message rather in advance to keep it short. But I hope that you will actually keep your presentation short, because we are running a little behind time and we do need some time for discussion later. But Ms. Khaled, can we get your presentation now?
Sure, that's quite all right, Bruce. So good morning or afternoon, everyone. And in the interest of time, I am just going to get right into it. So accessing quality nutrition, that's the topic I've been tasked with today. And some of the things we're going to be looking at during this presentation is what are some factors that negatively influence our access? What are the consequences of that? And what are some possible solutions? Although really there is one solution which I hope to propose during this presentation. Now, I'm sure that most, if not all of us in the audience are familiar with the concept of food security. Exists when all persons at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods. And there are 4 pillars to achieving this. For the purpose of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the financial and physical access to food. So what are some factors, major factors that influence our access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods? Chief among them, we have economic factors. So whether it be poverty, low wages, unemployment, or in more recent years, the rising food prices, which we have really been experiencing the impact of due to the COVID-19 pandemic and its containment measures. And to add to that now, the war in Ukraine. The average cost of a healthy diet has increased by some 6.7% from 2017 to 2020. And here in Latin America and the Caribbean, the cost is highest. More so, there are some 131.3 million persons in Latin America and the Caribbean that cannot afford to have a healthy diet. This is a balanced diet. And in the Caribbean region, it represents 52% of the population, a 3.5% increase from 2019. And the challenge is that the major challenge is that the cost of a healthy diet is likely to continue to increase as we have experienced surges in food prices, both in 2021 and 2022. Some other factors that influence food intake, and I believe that Ms. Charmaine would have highlighted some of these. We have environmental factors such as floods and drought, political instability, nutrition education or their lack of education, knowledge, and necessary skills, and the social factors influencing our meal patterns. For the purpose of the presentation, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the impact of the rising food prices, as many of the other factors would have been touched on by other panelists. So how does the cost of the diet influence the quality of our diet? Simple. It influences our food choices. There's no simpler way to put it. And thus creating a barrier towards accessing sufficient, safe, quality, or healthy foods. In recent years, we've been experiencing what is known as the nutrition transition, where we're seeing an increase in consumption in highly processed and ultra-processed foods and beverages, which tend to be high in fats, sugars, and/or salt or sodium. While on the other hand, there's been a decrease in consumption of unprocessed domestic plant-based foods, our locally produced fruits and vegetables and ground provisions and legumes. Why is this a problem? Because it is directly impacting the health of our population. We are seeing increases in malnutrition, both overnutrition from overconsumption of energy-dense foods and products, and undernutrition from not having the sufficient of the right kinds of nutrients, specifically vitamins and minerals that our body needs. And this is especially affecting the most vulnerable in our population, our women, children, and the elderly. In terms of malnutrition, we are experiencing a double burden, where we're seeing where undernutrition still exists, but on the other hand, overnutrition is increasing. In 2021, in the Caribbean region, 7.2 million persons, or 16.4% of the Caribbean population, were affected by hunger. On the other hand, 28 to 35% of males and females in the Caribbean are overweight or obese. In children, 1 in 3 Caribbean children. So this is translating into an economic burden for governments because greater allocation has to be, a greater budget has to be allocated towards healthcare. We're seeing a reduction in productivity of our populations, increase in diet-related diseases, specifically speaking about the non-communicable diseases, diabetes and heart disease and hypertension and cancers. And ultimately, this is impacting negatively on our mortality rates. In other words, we're seeing increase in premature deaths. So with all this in mind, what are the solutions? Many solutions have been proposed by all of our panelists. So I will focus on one solution that, especially from a public health perspective, can be instituted. Policy. Simple as that. Policy around factors that influence our access to food and therefore our levels of food security or attainment of food security. Specifically, policies around those factors that influence our food environment, which ultimately affect our choices and consumption patterns. Having policies in place and implementing those policies effectively will go a long way towards achieving our regional food security objectives. It is in this light that in this vein that the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARFA, along with CARICOM, would have instituted the 6-point policy package, which are a set of 6 policy points under which there are several policy options, all with the collective goal of promoting healthier food environments and food security to address childhood obesity through joint policy action. The 6-point policy package also aims to improve the knowledge and or create an enabling environment of our populace so as to improve access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious foods, even in emergency situations. So what are these 6 policy points? And I'll briefly highlight them and just give a quick synopsis on the achievement towards implementing each of these points so far at the regional level. Policy point 1 speaks to food labeling, so as to enable food consumers to make healthier choices. Charmaine would have mentioned the front of package warning label. So currently, member states are voting on the type of food label warning system that should be implemented, that should be in place on our food package. CARFA and CARICOM, the wider CARICOM and our regional agencies, we are in support of the octagonal shaped front of pack warning label. Why? Because studies have found, namely, and in the Caribbean region, study was carried out in Jamaica, have found that the octagon shaped front of pack warning label each time enable consumers to, 1, correctly identify foods that were high in sugar, sodium, fats, or saturated fats, and ultimately are positively impacted on their choices. That is, they were able to make healthier choices and informed decision. Our second policy point, nutritional standards and guidelines for schools and other institutions, so as to create an enabling environment within our schools. Currently, CARF along with PAHO are working on technical recommendations for the development of nutrition standards for Caribbean schools that would influence the types of foods that are made available and sold in and around our schools and school environment. Policy point 3, food marketing. This also aims to target children and so as to reduce the negative impact of the promotion of unhealthy foods and beverages, namely those high in trans fats, saturated fats, total fats, sugars, and salt or sodium. Policy point 4, nutritional quality of food supply, looking specifically at the levels of fats, sugars, and salts. There is currently an intergovernmental working group that is working to support countries' implementation of their commitment around the ban on trans fats. And in 2023, CARFER will be supporting this process by providing the necessary technical guidance to countries within the Caribbean region. And why a ban on trans fats? It is because of its link to not only NCDs, but specifically to cardiovascular diseases, leading to a reduction in quality of life and also shortening the life expectancy of persons. Policy point 5, trade and fiscal policies. There are currently 6 countries within the Caribbean region that would have instituted sugar sweetened beverages taxation, specifically in schools. Other options that are other policy options that are available would be to reduce the taxation on healthy products, healthy domestically produced products. Policy point 6, food chain incentives, so as to improve the local availability and acceptability of healthy foods, especially fruits and vegetables. An excellent example of this in action is the Sustainable or Resilient School Feeding Program, whereby farmers are incentivized to produce fresh produce, fruits, vegetables, ground provision, knowing that they have a guaranteed market, which is the schools and the children in turn, children, teachers, and the school environment generally benefit in turn from having products from having a healthier diet, having more plant-based diet, one that is also locally produced and organic. So these are the 6 policy points that if governments put in place, with of course the support of CARFA and other regional bodies, it can governments can adapt to promote healthier food environments. They can improve the access that persons have to foods and ultimately contribute towards achieving food security. Of course, what policy point is instituted and when will depend on the individual country context, but CARFA and CARICOM, we're here to support because the cost of doing nothing is simply too high. So I'm going to conclude here. We know that the effects of having inadequate access to food is malnutrition. And why that needs to be addressed, other than the obvious effects on our health, is the cost that that we face as individuals and also as governments. Obesity alone represents about $2 trillion annually. And the NCDs between 2011 to 2015 represented $7 trillion. Investing in ending malnutrition is one of the most cost-effective steps that governments can take, not only in terms of improving the health and productivity and quality of life of their population, but also putting more monies into their pockets, as in for the institution of other activities for the benefit of the population, for instance, social assistance programs. On every 16, malnutrition delivers $16 in return on every $1 spent. And I'll end here. Thank you very much, Bruce.
Okay, thank you very much. Abigail, Miss Caleb, for that interesting presentation. Now, the next presenter, in fact, the last presenter, the last, but by no means the least, is Omaira Avila Rostand, who's CARDI representative in Belize. And she's another of these people who can speak 2 languages, Spanish and English. And she's extremely good at Spanish because she was born in Caracas with a Trinidadian mother, I think, and a Venezuelan father. And well, she's been in the Caribbean, let's say the English-speaking Caribbean, because some people will argue that Venezuela is the Caribbean, for a number of years. In fact, she was here long before the Venezuelan migrants started coming here. And she was in Trinidad with the Ministry of Agriculture for a while, and now she's in Belize with CARDI. And amongst the crops she's working with in Belize is roots and tubers. So her presentation today is on roots and tubers' contribution to food and nutrition security. So Amara, and if I could please ask you to try and remain within time, because we want to have some discussion if possible afterwards. Thank you.
I'll try my best. Thank you very much for that introduction. And while I'm opening my presentation, I want to thank for the invitation, but also all the presenters before me. It was enlightening to see how nice everybody was in sync, although we didn't have a chance to see what the other ones were presented. But I think the topics has worked one after the other very nicely. So let me just try to open my presentation. So you could, I could start sharing. Can you see my presentation? Can anybody tell me if you all see my presentation?
Not yet, Amara.
Not as yet.
What about now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I will present very different from the others, not so general, but specifically the input that root crop have, how they have contributed to food security and nutrition in the region. My predecessors already spoke about what is food nutrition, food security, so I will just briefly mention it to you. When people, food security is when people have at all time have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritional food that meet their dietary needs and food preferences. Food preferences, dietary need, and they could keep an active life. Food nutrition and the other food nutrition and the other one, or nutrition security, is when people at all time have physical access to the economic food, but it depends on them if the choices they make, how they will develop that nutrition pattern in their life. And we saw it in the presentation done previously with the survey. Young people was taking choices that were totally different to what they should have, but they didn't bother about it. Food preparation is another issue, we saw it, and diversity in the diet. The Caribbean in particular, they have a term that I always hear, they don't eat what they don't know. So therefore, introducing new things will be difficult, okay? The food security in the Caribbean survey is being done by FAO, and this is in August. You could see here that they have food security at the end for each one of the countries of the Caribbean, and you could see the majority of them consider themselves from February to now to be food insecure. And that is challenging because that means the perception that they have of what the money they could get is that they cannot get what they prefer to consume. Not necessarily that they have no food, but whatever they are accustomed to purchase is not there. So they have a consumption pattern that they have and we particularly cannot meet, or the price is going up too quickly. Here also we see the same about the inflation. Now, previously this was presented, Suriname have 68.3, the Virgin Islands have 1.1, but everybody in the region is feeling how the increase, their salary is no longer able to provide them what they are accustomed to purchase for it. Well, we also have in that same report, the food consumption, persons that actually feel that they are suffering. I have not difficult eating enough, half of the population. But then we have a whole series of persons who have challenges consuming food during the day. So let me go to my topic, root crops import and food nutrition. The first thing you have to know that according to the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, this is how we have our plate. We consume majority staples, we have fats, vegetables, fruits. So when it comes to root crops, we are talking on how to enhance or improve the consumption of staples. That doesn't leave any way out the other factors that need to be put there. Legumes, fruits, vegetables. We have a challenge that persons actually consuming staples by themselves with proteins and no vegetable, no legumes. So, but that's another issue. So I will be talking about the impact of root crops. We have to know that root crops, because they are staple, they fall into the carbohydrates group. And we know they have complex and simple carbohydrates. The simple carbohydrates in a general, they are empty calories in the majority of the way. So what we are looking is to get the benefit of root crop as complex carbohydrates. So I like something that they said earlier. We have to be careful with ultra processed food. Even when developing the root crops, if we carry processes that are too much, we could actually destroy that factor that we consider good. So this is something that we have to be very clear. Okay, all of them is for energy. In CARICOM today, in 2017, they had a report, and this is which one the root crops of interest for the Caribbean. Now we have a vast amount. The region climatically could grow almost all root crops, and they grow very well. However, they have some that naturally, historically, climatically, everything become more possible to grow. And this is the list they give. But the four that really are making a difference start with cassava, sweet potato. Well, I cannot leave yam out because they have the yellow yam in Jamaica and yam in general, and that's it. Those are the ones that is actually moving the industry, or it's going into industrialization. No, also nutritionally, a lot of work is being done to improve, especially cassava, because one of the challenges with cassava was introduced for flour production was the nutritional value. So a lot of research is taking place, not necessarily in the Caribbean, but around the world to improve, and they have fortified the cassava. And sweet potato, where we know they have a diversity, and it's now to adopt it to consume. Nutritional wise, we know that sweet potato and cassava can compete. However, we have to be realistic. We also have Irish potato that in the past, we normally avoid to talk about it. Nonetheless, more and more Caribbean countries are producing their own Irish potato because it's one of the tubers that everyone in the Caribbean automatically go. But it's also because of the processing. I know a lot of work is being done to make sweet potato be able to develop as Irish potato, but still a lot to do. Okay. I also wanted to show here in how San Vincent was promoted in the recent Trinidad and Tobago Agri Expo. Their produce. They have very nice produce, but they go with the raw material. And that is also a challenge. If we don't work together, the different countries, some countries will only do raw material, and that will stop their development. Here we are talking about what is impact nutritionally they have. I just put this here for you. When they gave you the presentation, you could read it. But they all, as they are, have an impact in your nutrition as well in the energy production, because they still complex carbohydrates. If they are overprocessed, they don't have the same, and that is very important. I will go now to cassava. Why cassava? Because it's one of the crops that regionally and worldwide seems to be easier to produce in large amounts and to process into a product, which is flour, that could be mixed with flour and create composite. Also, sweet potato going just behind and the other. But in the Caribbean, a lot of effort has been done to do cassava development. But we have new products, and products that really could become competitive if they have the right marketing. Here we have cassava bread, we have grated cassava, we have pasta, and we have the traditional cassava bread. However, price-wise, this could be a challenge, okay? The contributions cassava have made to the industry have been first, or the crop in general, is stimulating processing of the industry. One point that never had before, it was that link of just producing raw material and selling it to somebody else to process. Now we have local persons trying to process, invest in money in order to create an industry, okay? The consumption also have increased, maybe on the older folks because they feel it's healthy, or they trying to consume healthy food, but also in the younger ones, because in the first 10 years, since 2007 to 2011, a lot of the work was done through the school feeding program. So their palates gonna accustom to it. We just have to be careful that we don't accustom them to ultra-processed flour of cassava, but it actually start to introduce them to the correct type, okay? The COVID-19 and the war in Russia open also a window to compete with wheat, because in all this, we cannot not realize that the price of wheat cannot compare with the flour. That's why we say composite. So therefore, now, seeing this changing in market, we will have a new push to be able to work in this area. Okay? A change? Okay. Here's some ideas that you could use, and this is another way. People don't know how to use it. They just know how to boil it, but the diversity and the convenience foods are not there. So we have to create processes that create convenient and healthy foods. Okay? Here they have some ideas that Costa Rica started to implement, and what they're doing is they not only put in the product, but they also tell you how to make it, and make a little pamphlets that you could get and see if you want to make it. Okay? We at Cardi, together with other partners, we also developed a little book with some chefs, and there you could see how to use it, because the truth is not with flour. So therefore, persons get discouraged because you want something convenient that you could mix. Okay? So this is the approach we are going. What are the challenges right now for this industry to go forward? Cost of production. The industry one in Trinidad, 1.5 TT per pound. Processing is not necessarily, a production is not necessarily matching that. And that is one challenge. Mechanization in harvesting and post-harvesting. A lot of the cassava that is produced is lost, okay? Peeling And this is when you have technologies for processing. One of the challenges and processes of cassava is peeling. They don't have a peeler that will actually reduce the losses due to the machines. Of course, we also hear about robotics, traceability, and other factors that also have to be incorporated in our processing industry. Cost of packaging. Now, that has nothing to do with the root crop. But if you saw the beautiful packages they have, there's a very, it's a high cost in their cost of production. Storage for convenient food, especially if they are in cold chains. Strengthen the value chain, and this is where farmers and processing. We know contracted farming. I mean, Basel working this so much, and this is something in the Caribbean we have to learn to trust, because if we don't get that right, we will always go back and forth. Market promotions, that is where we allow foreign industry to market their product better than we are. And we kind of leave them to, in a way, say that our products are not good. Market and promotion is strengthened of groups, I already said, and the right policy. Okay? Challenges in production, well, for yields, profitability, in order to become profitable, cassava need to be produced at least 5 acres and above. And that is a study we did many years ago. We have to work and reduce the post-harvest losses, which is almost 50%. The inadequate storage after you process cassava is not easy and any root crops, all of them get damaged if you don't do it. Okay? The right linkaging and maintain the emission. One thing, I always have a challenge, cassava is a low greenhouse gas emitting crop. However, if we start to put chemicals and create a very complicated package, we might take that from the crop. Here, I just want to talk about a little bit about the yields. Worldwide, yields average is 12.8 tons per hectare. However, cassava have a possibility to create 80 tons per hectare. Here, you could see that our average is very, very under that, with Suriname being the highest with 22, and San Lucia being the lowest with 2.2. Okay, I will not go. In 2016, they also had a study with Aica and Cayuca, and here they had the result, also very low yields. Cost of production, Barbados reported a cost of production when they have 15 tons metric per hectare, the earning, 25 and 30. I will leave it here because cost of production is something that impacts directly in what you could sell. This is some of the initiatives, government-driven initiative to adopt flour. It's not only flour, but it's one initiative that moves the most. Thank you very much. Sorry if I go a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope I'm not deleted. I hope you're hearing me because I can't see whether I'm at the moment. Oh, no, I'm not muted. Thank you very much, Omara. Now, I'm not quite sure how much time we have for questioning because I don't know when we're going to get cut off from this Zoom meeting. Or questions and discussions. I saw 1 or 2 comments coming through. Perhaps I can take those. And I'm going to ask, when I ask the panelists to say something, please just say a few words. Don't make try and make the reply 30 seconds or less. Vassal Stewart, are you still there? Yes.
I'm with you. Yes,
Somebody
I'm here.
asked whether you're paying any attention to climate smart technology, hydroponics, aquaponics, vertical systems. Quickly, can you tell us whether you are or not?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, the traditional production system will benefit tremendously from including these new technologies. So it's not a disagreement at all on that matter.
Okay, I don't think it was a disagreement. It was more a question. Okay, thanks very much. Now, somebody asked about insurance. Now, I don't know whether Dr. Blair is still there. the problem with insurance, of course, is that insurance companies are there to make a profit, not to, they're not charities. It's been a thorny question for a long time. If Dr. Blair is there, do you have any comments about farming insurance?
Well, we do recognize that there's an issue with risk and transfer mechanism in the region. And so we are engaging two agencies, CCRIF. They have some experience in providing agricultural insurance. I want to make the point though, these insurance packages or products that we are pursuing are parametric, so not exactly the conventional type. So this might address some of the concern that you were having there. Okay, thanks,
Dr. Blair. Omara Rostand, you did in fact give some statistics on the production of cassava. There was a general question about statistics on the volumes of roots and tubers that are cultivated in the region and the needed volumes.
Yeah, well, I really don't have the value. I get Basel now that he's working in that area. He might know the volume needed in general because he's working in the area right now. But that will depend on the industry that you want to see. And because one thing we're trying to promote is that cassava is produced for a particular commodity or product. And not necessarily you produce cassava and you sell it for everything, because that is what causes the problem that you have losses. When you don't meet the requirement for one industry, half of it is lost. So therefore, you have to work with a particular process, knowing that that's what you're looking for. Even in early 2011, we got varieties just trying to meet that specifically for processing. Russell, I don't know if you have volumes at this time. I really don't know.
Okay, I would say generally that there's not enough volume for anything, not for processing, not for fresh market at the moment. We need to increase productivity as well as the level of total output.
Okay, thanks, Vassal. Well, I mean, so in fact, we know that there isn't enough. All right, I saw somebody was asking if they could have the participants' coordinates, if they could find out how to get in touch with the panelists. Well, SIDS has everybody's email address. So if you get in touch with SIDS, I'm afraid I don't have SIDS' email address, but you can go on the web and try to find it out. Francine Aline there is very, very efficient, and she seems to be on top of everything. So if you want to know who to get in touch with at SIDS, I suggest you get in touch with her. And as I say, she's an extremely efficient person on top of everything. So if the message gets to her, I can tell you she'll certainly reply. There were one or two. By the way, I think we have a few minutes, so if anybody wants to pose any question to any of the panelists, please do so. I noticed that Miss Caleb, Abigail, you were adding some information which apparently you probably didn't have time. Do you quickly want to go over that information you were trying to add?
Oh yeah, no, I just wanted to highlight that in terms of food labeling and in terms of food labeling and what we're basing the high in terms of fats, sugars, and salt or sodium is the PAHO nutrient profile model, right, that they would have established for the region. Yeah, so it's based on a standard.
I actually saw it in Mexico, your labeling. I actually deleted one of my licenses because I was putting it. So I was happy that the Caribbean is actually thinking to adopt it. In Mexico, they adopted and it's working very well.
Well, currently,
It's also helping the kids to make decisions, because the kids, by seeing it, know if they have a problem, what not to eat and what not to eat.
Yeah, it's much easier than just looking at the nutrition facts at the back, where you may see a 10% or a 20% or a 50%. I mean, what does that mean? You need to have nutrition knowledge to understand that. Whereas with the octagon shape label, it's right at the front of the package. You pick it up and there it is. And then you make that choice whether you still want to consume, that product. But
Yeah.
it's currently before member states, their national management steering committees to vote on that decision. So hopefully,
Yeah.
you know,
But
that
that is exactly what nutrition is. You have the choice to make decisions. So we have to create that in order for them to have choices.
exactly.
Okay, Dr. Northover, I noticed you've been posting some comments. I think perhaps one of the disadvantages of speaking first is you don't when people speak later, you want to make some comments on it. So do you want to sort of quickly add something based on some of the comments you've been making?
No, I just wanted to encourage that one of the things that we need to introduce when we're thinking about food security is issues of food heritage. And I think making that link between knowledge that was protected through the activities of earlier generations, ancestors, and indigenous communities, that needs to be prioritized, because what has happened really is that there's a marginalization of all of these other potential plants, food species that are undervalued and underutilized. And FAO call them future smart foods, future smart options, as sort of what I think Vassal said, back to the future. So it's really recognizing that a lot of the things that have been thrown under the bus because of asymmetric power relationships and dislocations of local communities, and because we know the histories of racial injustice and asymmetric dynamics of extraction, has generated a very weak base for our domestic and indigenous communities. So we definitely need to empower those communities, put their heritage on the table, so that food heritage, I think in the COP27 talks, was the first time that it was included on the agenda. And that's largely because it's tied to these issues of homogenization and lack of diversification that we have with our traditional diets and production cultures.
Okay, thank you. And you know what I said a few moments ago about the efficiency of SIDS, in particular, Francine Aline. Look at that. She's already sent us an email address, salises@sta.uwi.edu. And I guarantee that if you send an email to that address, you'll get a response. Somebody's asking, how do we stop the thief? So our farmers can farm without risking their lives. Well, of course, that's a problem for all of us, but Steve, do you have any ideas on that one?
No, my hand was up actually for a previous comment, so let me tackle that first in the time that I have. I want to remind us about the importance of traditional knowledge, heirloom varieties, the fact that within certain communities, and if you use Guyana as a typical example, there are varieties of corn and so within the indigenous communities that are more climate ready, if you like, that may be drought tolerant, salt tolerant. We have seen the importance of heirloom varieties. Cardi has been quite rightly boasting about the varieties that they have released from climate analogs. A climate analog is a country or location going through the type of climate change issues that we either have now or in line to get, so that the acquisitions from the Pacific have been used by Cardi to promote some of these new releases in St. Vincent and other places. So that was the point I wanted to make. With regards to pre-elastin, I don't think I'm qualified to speak about that.
We'll make a quick comment on that.
Okay, Russell, if you have a comment, yes.
Yeah, I think there are two things that have to happen, particularly with pre-elastin. One, many countries do have legislation that requires trade in fresh produce to be backed by paper trail. So there should always be indication of where a retailer or a wholesaler gets the product from, which would allow the pre-elastin police, or where they do exist, to be able to enforce the regulation. Because if people have to indicate where they get their production from or they produce from, then you could track it back to source. So that's one of the things that needs to be done. And we are advocating as well. I mentioned earlier on the need for these drone pools that we can begin to monitor crops at the time when they're coming into maturity. by providing a service to farmers. So there are things that we can begin to do to reduce that, both from the enforcement of existing legislation as well as using the new technologies that are available to us.
Okay, Dr. Godfrey and Bernard, I see you have your hand up. Is that because we have to finish now?
No, not necessarily, although we are close to the end. I just wanted to comment on the issue relating to the exchanging of emails and the presentations that some members of the virtual audience seem to want. I just want to make it clear that SIDS will communicate with the authors with respect to their emails. I know that there are concerns about intellectual property, and I do not know to what extent, you know, some of the work being presented is going to be published elsewhere and what kind of protocols exist with respect to that. So I think it's a case of getting the clearance of the authors whether or not they would wish to have their presentations, you know, going beyond this forum in terms of the form in which they are requested. The other issue, of course, is in the event that members of the virtual audience do receive, you know, the presentations, I would like you to pay all respects to the author in terms of citing the author if you are going to use the material, and insofar as you're citing the author, of course, I think there ought to be some reference to the forum where the paper was presented. So there are some protocols that ought to be observed in terms of, you know, receiving the PowerPoint presentations if the authors do decide, well, there are no copyright infringements or intellectual property infringements, and they wish to share the presentations the way you are requesting them. Those are my comments, but SIDS will make an effort to clear up those issues and make whatever is available to those who would request it. I would suggest if you request it, you put in your request through SIDS and we will send it to you accordingly. We will not be posting the PowerPoint presentations on our website, not at all. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Bernard. I noticed that some presenters have already posted on this forum, so, but I think we need to be aware of Dr. Bernard's comments. Just because they posted on this forum doesn't mean that we can plagiarize it or not acknowledge the author or not acknowledge the forum. Dr. Blair, Richard Blair, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, Bruce. Thanks. Just to respond to Steve had made some remarks at the end of his presentation, stressing the need for emphasis on nutrient loading as against price. And I agree with him, you know, the focus has to be on nutrient, not just on cost. But the discussion is moving more and more towards affordable, healthy diet. So I'm thinking, Steve, maybe you might want to jump in here. How are we going to really disentangle the issue of cost and price from nutrient if the focus is on affordable, healthy diet?
Okay. Well, as I mentioned,
may I, Bruce?
Yes, of course.
Just quickly, I would think that, Richard, we'd have to be looking at the true cost of on a nutrient by nutrient basis. If you really want to go down that road, in that, what are the implications of a 2-cent differential in price and a 30-cent hospitalization bill? I mean, you know, I don't want to be melodramatic, but I think we are at that stage now where we are able to discern high nutrient density as opposed to empty calories. I mean, so that, let me put it bluntly, I would not be interested in a reduction of a food import bill that includes carbonated beverages and soft drinks. If you understand where I'm going, Richard, right? So I would think that one would have to look at the nutrient dense imports, especially those that aren't highly processed, and see if we can make an impact there, because that would have a direct positive impact on nutrition security, which is where my head is focused.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that helps, Richard.
Thank you, Steve. As I've been mentioning earlier, I think we've probably overrun our time, but we have Miss Lisa James, who's going to give us a vote of thanks. And I'm going to call her now because I hate for us to be cut off before Lisa's given her vote of thanks. So Lisa James is an agricultural economist here at Cardi, and she's sitting about 2 rooms away from me, but I hope she's ready to give the vote of thanks. Are you there, Miss James? Maybe she's not.
Hi, good day.
Okay.
Bruce, thank you. The 13th virtual forum hosted by SIDS and in collaboration with Cardi would not have been the success it was today if it were not for the contribution of many persons. It is therefore imperative for us to express our sincere gratitude to the many persons who contributed to the execution of this webinar. On behalf of SIDS and Cardi, we would like to take the opportunity to thank the featured speakers who set the tone for the discussion and the panelists who then interrogated the so important thematic area of food security in the region. We would like to thank the Honorable Minister Mustafa, the Minister of Agriculture in Guyana. Although he was unavoidably absent due to a prior engagement, he ensured that the ministry was ably represented by Dr. Richard Blair, Advisor, CARICOM Agri-Food System and Special Ministerial Task Force on Food Production and Food Security. Dr. Blair, thank you for your insightful presentation. Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard, the Acting Director of SIDS, for his foresight in initiating these virtual forums and ensuring the discourse of pertinent thematic areas that are so needed to inform the development of Caribbean SIDS remain on the front burner. Dr. St. Bernard, we thank you. Mr. Fayaz Shah, who presented on behalf of the Executive Director of Cardi, who too was unavoidably absent. We express our sincere gratitude for you concisely highlighting the work of Cardi as we forge ahead with the implementation of the regional agriculture agenda. We acknowledge and express our gratitude to the distinguished panelists for their very insightful, provocative, thought-provoking presentations, followed by a vibrant discussion. Dr. Patricia Northover, Mr. Vassal Short, Ms. Charmaine Metivier, Mr. Steve Maxime, Ms. Abigail Caleb, and Ms. Umaira Avila Rustan. We thank you individually for your presentations and your contribution to the discussions. In all productions, there is an engine room. That is, those in the operation behind the scenes, those persons who ensure the smooth and seamless operation of this forum. Ms. Katian Modest and later Ms. Francine Alain for following up on the logistics required to realize this forum and embracing a project management role, including being the glue that ensured that both SIDS and Cardi embarked on a successful collaborative venture. Mr. Jason Chamaru and Ms. Samantha R. Morgan for providing the technical services that facilitated the successful virtual delivery of these proceedings. Ms. Josanne Green and the staff of the Marketing and Communication Department, UE, St. Augustine, for their unwavering support in assuring that acceptable standards of conduct were evident in the delivery and the branding of the forum, and at the same time, delivering the artwork and displaying critical information that provided a basis for publicizing the forum. Ms. Denise Besai, Upal Morris, Mr. Kurt Roberts, and Mr. Kern Richards for their roles in the execution of this forum. The management of both SIDS and CARDI, who rose to the occasion and willingly accepted to co-host this webinar with SIDS. We say thank you. And Mr. Bruce Lucknow, our chair, who willingly accepted the offer to steer today's proceedings. Mr. Lucknow executed his role with enthusiasm and kept us on time and kept the proceedings flowing smoothly and efficiently. Our virtual audience, who stayed the course of the time and engaged the panelists in discussion, we thank you. Now I turn over to the chair for closing remarks.
All right, I don't know whether you're hearing me. You don't seem to be here I am. Well, that was a very good vote of thanks, because usually when a vote of thanks is given, I have to remember who was not thanked. But Lisa, you remembered everybody, so I don't. With one exception, you didn't thank yourself for giving the vote of thanks. So thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you also for thanking me, and I see that Dr. Patricia Northover has also thanked me. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. We've really had a good discussion this morning. The presenters all probably could have gone on for half an hour or more, and I was sending them all sorts of nasty messages, and eventually most of them took note of it. So thank you very much. Dr. Godfrey St. Bernard has reminded us over and over again that there's many similar forums being given by SIDS. I'm going to watch some of them, you know. I must admit, this is the first SIDS forum I've attended in any fashion. I'll also admit that from now on, I'm going to be a regular attendant at SIDS forum. So thank you very much, everybody. And it's time for lunch. We're all getting hungry. Have a good day.